Baucis shares her past. The two find a destination. The town that moved. Well, it's getting pretty dark out. Should we stop for a rest? Philemon said, looking for a place to pull over his vehicle. How do you sleep when you're always on the road, Phil? Well, when I'm in the woods hunting more wild game to sell, I sleep in a tent. But most nights on the road, I just lean back my seat and sleep under the stars. You could take the tent or sleep in the back seat. Doesn't matter to me. I guess I'll sleep in the back seat until we reach the next town. It's not luxurious, but that is my version of life on the road. Looking up at the stars, though, is kind of like... In the place I grew up, we had scholars. People who would look up at the night sky as it changes over the year. They found connect-the-dot characters amongst the stars and created stories and characters about them. The end result is that depending on when you were born during the year, they tried to assign characteristics to individuals. But it was mainly a fun game where people tried to create monthly, weekly, or if you were really into it, daily bits of advice or predictions of the future. Like a less fun, more convoluted version of your fortune-telling. Baucis was silent for a moment. I just thought that you would like to hear about it. It was a long time ago for me, but you seemed so happy when talking about fortune-telling earlier. Baucis seemed to be deep in thought for a moment, a downcast look to her usually bright demeanor despite the circumstances the two had been through. It wasn't really the fortune-telling that made me nostalgic for those past days. Back then it was me and my mom and dad in a traveling circus. You can say I'm very used to traveling during the darkness of night. That's when the circus's caravans moved to the next town. We would get up early in the morning, set up tents, put on our shows throughout the evening, and then usually be moving on to the next town late at night. That was how we would travel, finding rest between towns until the next show was to begin. Back in those days, I had kind of a sweater vest thing on to hide my wings. The ringmaster said it would overlap with my parents' act, so the fortune teller wore a sweater. Do his fortune! Do his fortune! Oh, okay. Throughout the crowd, Baucis noticed a couple in front, one excited and the other looking as if he wanted to escape. You, mister. She singled him out of the crowd. Yes? I see that the business you are part of is growing. You may have been ignored in the past, but I see a raise, no, even a promotion in your future. Wow, that'd be nice. Me. Oh, please, it has to be me now, my fortune. I get a vision that you have been seeing someone as of late. The woman in the crowd was leaning forward on her toes, strung along by each word Baucis was saying. I see that this relationship should be soon, how should I say this? It appears it could be fruitful soon enough. The woman basically jumped into the man's arms. Did you hear that? Maybe we could be parents soon. Well, first let's see about that promotion she mentioned. After that, it was back to the caravan. Those moments were probably the happiest in my life. It was just me, Mom, and Dad at the dinner table. Sure, some days the caravan had to be on the move, running over bumps in the road, rocking the table, but that didn't change a thing. They would tell me stories about a great city in the clouds, inhabited by people with wings, just like ourselves. They told me that their families had disagreed with their relationship, and so they ran away together. It was the most romantic story I've ever heard. My mom and dad's act was a high-flying trapeze act. The entire audience would always cheer, seeing them swing on the trapeze and float through the air towards each other over seemingly impossible distances. Of course, it seemed so impossible because it probably was for the human audience, who probably thought the sylph's wings were part of some sort of costume. Imagine that. A trapeze act without any sort of danger involved to the performers. If they ever actually missed a bar or something, they corrected with their wings, and the audience just thought it was part of the act. The applause were always deafening, but I was proved wrong about how there was no danger. That danger was proven one night after their act was over, and everyone except a handful of people had left the big top. There's no danger for people like you doing the trapeze act, not with your wings, right? The crowd of men were laughing. Then again, there's no way they could be real though, right? What's with those costumes? The men started walking towards them, reaching for their outfits, and their wings coming out of the back of them. Baucis' father stepped in front of them, squaring up. Hands to yourself, guys. The show's over. Go on home, he said to them. Tough guy, huh? The man reached forward, pulling on the sylph's wing. It didn't give the same way costume wings would. Baucis' father winced in pain from this before shoving the man backwards. Are, are those things actually real? And freaks like you dare to shove me to the ground? The man spat at the ground before he and his group circled the two sylphs. Of course I wasn't in the big top at the time this happened, my fortune teller booth located elsewhere, but this telling comes from things I would hear later. My father wasn't the type of man who would sit still listening to insults, or run away when someone threatened to injure him. My mother wasn't the type of woman to sit and watch him fight alone. The next morning is actually when me and the rest of the circus got the news from the ringmaster. I gathered the entirety of the circus here this morning to give you some horrible news about the happenings of last night. Baucis had not seen her parents all morning, and as the ringmaster's announcement became more serious in tone, she became increasingly nervous. After the show was over in the big top, most of the performers and audience had left, but two of our performers remained when a group of individuals from the audience approached them. Our two trapeze artists were apparently killed in this exchange. The circus performers were completely silent, other than a scattering of gas from the gathering. Baucis' legs were shaking, her vision wavering, her knees were about to give way when she felt a hand on each shoulder holding her up. I can imagine the shock you all feel from this announcement, and in light of that, our caravan will not be traveling tonight. Take this night to grieve, rest, or collect your thoughts. Someone must have carried me to my room, because the next thing I remember is sitting on my bed, weeping and staring at the wall. That must have been going on for hours, because when I looked out the window it was dark outside. I needed to do something other than sit around. I grabbed a torch and decided to take a walk at night, when there shouldn't be anyone else around. I began walking around the dark circle of caravans. The dark tents and the signs designating the attraction within was the only life I had ever known. And now the most important parts of that life were gone, forever. I couldn't understand that phrase back then, still have trouble today at my worst moments. I would never see the only people I truly ever loved again. Seeing the tents bringing years of memories I had experienced with them. That's when I came across a tent and sign I had never seen before. Had they added a new attraction and I had just not ever seen it? The circus life could be busy that way at times. The sign above the opening read, Biological Wonders. As I approached I heard voices from within and looked inside the tent. Suspended and preserved in a vat in this new attraction tent were the corpses of my parents. Those sylphs were apparently the Biological Wonders. At its base was a shadowy group of men. One stood across from the rest, wearing a top hat. Once I heard his voice I could tell it was the ringmaster. So what's the bottom line of what you were trying to say? I'm saying take this money, go far away, and never return to another one of my circuses. You dodge any connection to a murder, which is what you and your boys did, and I also don't have to deal with any police force digging through my circus. This new attraction will hopefully fill seats while I see about a new trapeze act. This is a lot of dough just for some hush money. If you have this much, how about me and my boys try to put an act together? It could be profitable. The ringmaster just let out a sigh and acquiesced to listening to their pitch. He heard all kinds of terrible act ideas. This was surely to be another, but he did not want to make them mad when he was this close to a clean getaway after what transpired the night before. He would sell the specimens on display and never stop at this town again. All right, boys, let's hear the act idea. I had heard enough at that point. My already broken heart was turning darker and darker listening to their words. I backed away from the tent. I stood there a couple minutes in the darkness of the night, holding my lantern before I got an idea and acted. In that moment, think about what that group of men did. Think of what the ringmaster was pardoning. I threw my lantern down onto the tent at its opening, so the door would be engulfed first, exiting the burning tent thusly being out of the question. Back in those days, they made circus tents waterproof to protect the show within no matter the weather. What they put on the fabric of the tent to make it waterproof was a mix of gasoline and wax, which I had seen and helped them apply multiple times, so I knew exactly what it would mean when I threw the fire of my torch down at the tent. I walked away listening to the screams within, knowing that those screams came from the murderers of my parents, and the ringmaster who had pardoned that crime. After that moment, I knew that what I did was a sin. I murdered those people. I wandered aimlessly from town to town until I reached the one where we eventually met. I went to their meeting place and they told me their ideas about how the world and all of us were formed. Then I was put into one of those cells until I eventually met the Undine and the member of the town they had decided would be sacrificed with us. I was okay with that fate. I thought maybe it was the consequence I deserved after burning that tent to the ground with those people inside it. But then you showed up. The town's chosen was free to live, and then you broke us out. When I saw that mountain explode, and surely the destruction of that town, I thought maybe I should have stayed and taken the punishment I was fated to after all I had done. I'm sorry to hear all that happened to you, Baucis, but that is a huge crock of bullshit. You shouldn't ever apologize for doing what you needed to do to survive. Do you not think that I have done stuff that others would describe as a sin? You have seen the gun I carry at my side. I have never hesitated to use it when the need arose. But I have never fired on anyone who I didn't feel the need to in order to survive. So in that sense, I suppose we were in the same boat, as it were. Those people harmed your family, and you were the loose end that would have been left. Don't ever apologize for doing what you need to survive. If you were traveling with me, you should know that I have definitely done far worse. After that, the two eventually found a place of comfort within that little car, took time to rest and recollect, and eventually to sleep.